The Intentional Fallacy is an influential essay written by literary critics William K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Beardsley. It was first published in 1946 and has since become a cornerstone of New Criticism, a school of literary theory that emerged in the early 20th century. The essay challenges the idea of considering an author's intentions as a primary or sole criterion for interpreting and evaluating a literary work. Wimsatt and Beardsley argue against the practice of using an author's intentions or biography to determine the meaning of a literary text. They contend that readers should focus solely on the text itself, examining the words and symbols within it, rather than attempting to uncover the author's personal intentions or historical context. They assert that an author's intentions are often unclear and may not align with the final product, and that even if we knew the author's intentions, they shouldn't necessarily dictate the meaning of a work. The essay introduces the concept of the intentional fallacy, which is the mistaken belief that the author's intentions are the most important factor in interpreting a text. Wimsatt and Beardsley argue that the meaning of a literary work should be derived from the text's inherent qualities and how readers engage with it. They suggest that readers should consider the work as a self-contained entity and analyze it using formalist methods, paying attention to elements such as imagery, symbolism, structure, and language. Overall, the intentional fallacy encourages a shift away from biographical and author-centered interpretations of literature and promotes the idea that meaning should be found within the text itself, independent of the author's intentions or personal history. This approach has had a significant influence on literary criticism and continues to be a key concept in the study of literature. The Intentional Fallacy, by William K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Beardsley, is a seminal essay in the field of literary criticism. Published in 1946, it challenges the prevailing notion that an author's intentions are the primary or most important factor in interpreting a literary work. Below is a full summary of the essay. Introduction. Wimsatt and Beardsley begin by addressing the widespread belief that understanding an author's intentions is crucial to interpreting a literary text. They argue that this belief leads to what they call the intentional fallacy. This fallacy involves the mistaken assumption that the author's intentions are the sole or most authoritative source of a work's meaning. The intentional fallacy defined. The authors define the intentional fallacy as the act of using an author's intentions or biography to determine the meaning of a literary work. They contend that this approach is flawed for several reasons. The uncertainty of authorial intentions. Wimsatt and Beardsley point out that an author's intentions are often unclear and may not align with the final product. Authors may not fully understand their own creative processes or may have conflicting intentions. Furthermore, what an author says about their work may not be entirely accurate or reliable. The biographical fallacy. The essay discusses what the authors refer to as the biographical fallacy, which is the tendency to interpret a text in light of the author's life experiences or historical context. They argue that this approach does not necessarily yield valid insights into the text itself. The affective fallacy. Another fallacy the authors address is the affective fallacy, which involves judging a work's quality based on the emotional responses it elicits in readers. They argue that whether a reader likes or dislikes a work should not determine its literary merit. The text is an autonomous entity. Wimsatt and Beardsley propose an alternative approach to literary interpretation, suggesting that the meaning of a text should be derived from the text itself. They argue for a formalist perspective that emphasizes the inherent qualities of the text, such as imagery, symbolism, structure, and language. The role of the informed reader. The authors acknowledge that readers play a crucial role in interpreting a text. They suggest that an informed reader is one who is well versed in literary conventions, history, and criticism and can engage deeply with the text to uncover its meaning. Conclusion. In conclusion, the intentional fallacy advocates for a shift away from biographical and author-centered interpretations of literature. Wimsatt and Beardsley argue that meaning should be sought within the text itself, without relying on the author's intentions or personal history. They believe that a formalist analysis, coupled with the insights of an informed reader, provides a more reliable and meaningful approach to understanding and evaluating literary works. The intentional fallacy has had a profound and lasting impact on the field of literary criticism, influencing subsequent generations of critics and scholars to focus on the text's intrinsic qualities when interpreting literature. To illustrate the concept of the intentional fallacy, and the idea that meaning in literature should be derived from the text itself rather than the author's intentions, let's consider an example. Example: The Yellow Wallpaper, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. The Yellow Wallpaper is a classic short story that can be analyzed in the context of the intentional fallacy. Author's background. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the author, suffered from depression and underwent a controversial treatment known as the rest cure. This treatment and her experiences with mental illness informed her writing of The Yellow Wallpaper. Intentional fallacy interpretation. If we were to apply the intentional fallacy, we might focus on Gilman's personal experiences and intentions while writing the story. We could argue that the story is a direct reflection of her struggles with mental health and her critique of the rest cure as a harmful treatment. Formalist interpretation rejecting the intentional fallacy. However, in line with Wimsatt and Beardsley's argument against the intentional fallacy, a formalist interpretation would emphasize the text itself, divorced from Gilman's intentions or biography. In this approach, we would analyze the story's elements within the text. Narrative structure. We might examine the first-person narrative and the progression of the protagonist's descent into madness. Symbolism. We would pay attention to the significance of the yellow wallpaper in the narrator's room and how it represents her deteriorating mental state. Imagery and descriptive language. We could analyze Gilman's use of vivid, evocative language to convey the protagonist's growing obsession with the wallpaper. Character development. We would explore how the protagonist's character changes over the course of the story and how her perceptions are influenced by her environment. By focusing on these elements within the text itself, a formalist interpretation allows us to derive meaning from the story's literary qualities rather than relying solely on the author's intentions. This approach enables a richer understanding of the narrative, its themes, and its impact on readers, independent of Gilman's personal experiences or intentions. Let's further examine Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, in the context of the intentional fallacy, formalist interpretation, and its literary elements. Intentional fallacy interpretation. When applying the intentional fallacy to The Yellow Wallpaper, we would emphasize Charlotte Perkins Gilman's personal experiences and intentions as the primary sources of meaning. Author's biography. We would focus on Gilman's own struggles with depression and her experiences with the rest cure, suggesting that the story is a direct reflection of her own mental health issues. Intentions and message. We might argue that the story is intended as a critique of the medical establishment of her time, specifically the rest cure, and as a call to action to improve the treatment of women's mental health. Personal connection. Readers would be encouraged to draw connections between Gilman's life and the narrator's experiences, seeing the story as a form of autobiographical expression. Formalist interpretation rejecting the intentional fallacy. Taking a formalist approach, we would focus on the inherent qualities of the text itself, paying less attention to the author's intentions. Narrative structure. We might analyze the story's first-person narrative and its gradual descent into madness, emphasizing how this narrative technique contributes to the story's eerie and claustrophobic atmosphere. Symbolism. A formalist analysis would emphasize the symbolism of the yellow wallpaper itself. We might argue that it symbolizes the protagonist's deteriorating mental state, the societal constraints on women, or even the horror within the domestic sphere. Imagery and descriptive language. We would examine Gilman's vivid and evocative descriptions of the wallpaper, the room, and the protagonist's perception of them. This would allow us to explore the story's emotional impact on the reader. Character development. The formalist approach would involve a detailed examination of how the protagonist's character changes over the course of the narrative, moving from initial passivity to a more active and disturbing state. By adopting a formalist perspective, we can appreciate The Yellow Wallpaper as a work of art with its own internal structure, symbolism, and emotional resonance. While acknowledging that Gilman's experiences and intentions likely influenced her writing, we do not reduce the story to a mere reflection of her biography or a vehicle for her message. Instead, we explore the complexity of the text and how its literary elements come together to create a powerful and thought-provoking narrative that transcends the author's intentions. The Yellow Wallpaper, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, holds significant literary and cultural importance for several reasons. Early feminist literature. The story is often considered an early work of feminist literature. It explores themes related to women's oppression, particularly in the context of the 19th century medical treatment of women's mental health. The narrator's descent into madness and her struggle to assert her agency within a patriarchal society reflects broader feminist concerns of the time. Critique of the medical establishment. The Yellow Wallpaper serves as a powerful critique of the medical establishment's treatment of women's mental health. The rest cure, which the protagonist undergoes, was a real and controversial treatment at the time, and the story highlights its damaging effects on women's mental and emotional well-being. Exploration of gender roles. The story delves into the restrictive gender roles and expectations placed on women in the 19th century. It exposes the confinement and powerlessness experienced by women who were often confined to domestic spaces and subjected to the authority of male physicians and family members. Psychological exploration. Gilman's narrative skillfully explores the protagonist's descent into madness, providing readers with a vivid portrayal of her deteriorating mental state. The story is a compelling early example of psychological fiction, where the inner workings of the human mind are central to the plot. Symbolism and allegory. The yellow wallpaper itself serves as a powerful symbol in the story, representing various layers of meaning. It symbolizes the protagonist's deteriorating mental state, her growing dissatisfaction with her domestic role, and the constraints of her marriage and society. Narrative technique. Gilman's use of a first-person narrative allows readers to intimately experience the protagonist's journey and her descent into madness. This narrative choice contributes to the story.